Our next speaker is Dr. George Lucas. No, not the creator of Star Wars, even better, the newly appointed A.N. Whitehead Visiting Professor and Director of the Center for Process Studies Archives at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Dr. Lucas is Professor Emeritus at the U.S. Naval Academy and recently retired after 10 years as General Editor of the Critical Edition of Whitehead. He wrote his doctoral dissertation at Northwestern University on Hegel and Whitehead in 1978, and subsequently wrote several books and articles on various kinds of process philosophy and their histories, culminating in a title called The Rehabilitation of Whitehead, an Analytic and Historical Assessment of Process Philosophy, published in 1990, a wonderful title. He was thereafter the editor of the SUNY series in philosophy for 18 years. In 2023, he published his most recent book, The Ordering of Time, Meditations on the History of Philosophy, which was awarded the J.N. Findlay Prize for Best Title in Metaphysics by the Metaphysical Society of America. So, Dr. Lucas, the floor is yours.
Before I start, let me ask how we're doing for time, because I want, yeah. No. So, are you sure? Okay. I don't want to take too much of it. And mine is a very sort of different, more informal presentation than my two colleagues, brilliant, and then our keynote as well, have been really brilliant and insightful pieces. This is more an historical bit. Thank you, Matt, for mentioning my dream job that I've come out of retirement to hold, although my wife would point out that it's the first time I've held an appointment in which the salary is commensurate with my worth. Zero. This is a volunteer position in an emergency of sorts, which I hope to occupy, take care of for the next year or two, assuming I last that long. And it will culminate, we hope, in the invitation I will now issue to all of you on behalf of Andrew and Randy Auxier, Professor Auxier from SIU, and colleagues whose vision brought all this to pass, solving a complex problem and creating an entity in Southern Illinois to join the Dewey Center and the papers of Paul Weiss and a number of other, and now those will be joined by Charles Hartshorne and John Cobb. And it's a really exciting project, and I'm very pleased to be part of it. And it's going to culminate in holding the 14th International Whitehead Congress at Carbondale, Illinois in 2026, I think in the summer. We're working on that right now. Point is, you got to come. I'm inviting you now. We need you to come, and we need you along with the other things you do, like support the edition, Critical Edition of Whitehead, and the center itself and its activities, which still exists in a very appropriately virtual state, dispersed all over China and the US and Germany and a number of other places. The physical location of these entities, the libraries, the papers of Whitehead, Hartshorne, Cobb, Dewey, and others, will be the locus we also hope to gather you around 2 years from now. So we need your support, and we need funding for these things. I took the position because I'm retired and I can afford to fund my own position. And will do so, but I'm going to be mostly raising funds to make this possible, these events, the continuation of the center, and perhaps even the true endowment of a Whitehead chair that will be something that some of you here can apply to do in years to come, out of retirement or as you get a sabbatical or whatever it may be. Okay. So let me turn for a minute then, having mentioned that context in which I come to you this morning, kind of strange context that has my friends thinking I'm really completely out of my mind, to stop retirement and start working for nothing. But this is something worth doing. And this project that Joe presented has been something worth doing and continuing to do. It's yielded a lot of insights. We have talked today, and Andrew even quoted from a few lines from Whitehead's address 100 years ago, in presumably this very hall, as far as we can determine, because it's the only place in Emerson Hall where they could have gathered all the what they called the grandees at the time, all the great philosophers who were here, plus the students and everybody else. It's probably the place in which that lecture was delivered. And here it is. I'm holding it. Now, that is the thing that is strange and exciting, because it involves a number of people, including Joe Paddock in the room here, who made that possible. But it's a story in itself. You may recall, and here I have Victor Lowe's, Alfred North Whitehead, the man and his work. Many of you will have seen this, perhaps read it, or read some portions of it, including the portion where he discusses this day 100 years ago, in which, see, I'm open to the wrong pages, it looks like. My glasses on here. Oh, yes, here we go. The lectures began. He says on Tuesday, September the 23rd, Joe figured out that it was, in fact, Thursday, the 25th. No fault of Victor's that there's a slight error there. They all came to Emerson Hall to hear this first lecture, which I now have and can show you if you'd like to see it. They were all curious about what he had to say to them. And then Victor writes, or gives the account from what little evidence he has, that what was delivered in this lecture was largely unintelligible to the people who were in the audience. Now, at one level, that may not surprise you, because Whitehead is not an easy thinker, but he's also one of the most eloquent writers that we have. So which was it? Was it unintelligible, as later the Gifford lectures themselves would be described by attendees as being? Or was it what I find when I read this, something more like the poetry Joe quoted about the ocean tides coming and flowing and so forth? This is a brilliant lecture. It's a lecture that is absolutely, I think it's the most exciting single discovery in the last century, that to find it and actually see what he had to say, because of course Victor goes on here to say, there does not seem to be any transcript of this lecture. And later he complains that people like Charles Hartshorne have told him that someone, and they think it was a guy named Winthrop Bell, was taking notes. And what Victor will say later on in this volume, I have looked for those notes, tried to find them. I have found no evidence they exist. I know there was such a person as Winthrop Bell, but I'm not sure he was even present at the lecture. I mean, he's frustrated, because if anyone knows anything about him, he was a very persistent man. He was determined to find everything in the Whiteheadian Nachlass that he could, but he never found this. And we did. Long after, we found two things, actually. About 10 years ago, as I began working with Brian Henning on what were the beginnings of the Critical Edition, Volume 1, Harvard Lectures, 1924, those became possible because another colleague of ours, a student of Professor Auxier's named Jason Bell, now studying at Vanderbilt, now teaching up in Canada, was at Mount Allison University, where Winthrop Bell had been a student. And he found in the Bell papers something that he regarded as a likely notebook full of lecture notes from Whitehead's class in 1924, 80 years after the fact. The reasons, this goes on, and I could go on, and you got to stop me, but yeah, you will. The keeper of those notes, a philosopher, Winthrop Bell, was a Canadian. He had come to Harvard to study. They had sent him over to the University of Göttingen to study with Husserl. He was the first North American to get a degree in phenomenology and come back to the States and help, or come back to North America and help spread the excitement about phenomenology, which wasn't that different from the philosophy of experience of the Americans. So there was a real synergy at that time, right before World War I. So Bell is here and he's taking notes, but he also has another little piece of history I won't bore you with, but he was an MI6 agent and was for most of his life, including the time he had been studying in Germany. He had been sending correspondence back to London and back to Canada to the Prime Minister, talking about the German situation during and after the war. He himself was imprisoned, and yeah, the story goes on and makes it possible. And the thing that, if you look over at Randy Oxier here, he's holding a book that has just come out. I encourage you to all, called Cracking the Nazi Code, Jason Bell on Winthrop Bell. It's the history of this whole thing, including the discovery and the warning about the Holocaust. So
a good read.
It's an amazing read in and of itself. Well, back to the lecture and Whitehead and Bell. So we got the notes. And then 10 years later, thanks to our colleague and friend, George Whitehead, and our friendship and discussion, we found boxes of material, or rather, George admitted there were boxes of material that they hadn't handed over to Victor, despite his pleas. And maybe it was time to do it now. And we got those, and I took them home. I drove them down from up here, and I opened them up and looked at them. And here was first lecture, typed up. There it was. So we know what Whitehead said. It was, I can guarantee you, not unintelligible. It was beautiful. Some of the more detailed discussion sounds a bit like some discussions that we've been reading in Randy Oxier's class on process and reality in part 2. So there's not this radical discontinuity or mystery or obscurity about it. It's really very eloquent stuff. But if you were going to give it a subtitle, I'd give it the subtitle Horses, Cricket Bats, and Ocean Tides, because he wraps up his discussion with those examples in a fascinating way, which shows that he is not here to do anything other than what he said he would do, namely provide a philosophical basis for understanding the transformation of the natural sciences in the beginning of the 20th century. And in particular, the philosophical view of that transformation that he cannot accept and will not agree to and will systematically refute in this class and in the lectures to come are the views of Bertrand Russell, as delivered in his little lectures a few years before, the philosophy of logical atomism. Logical atomism cannot possibly be the metaphysical foundation of the sciences of quantum mechanics and relativity. And I will show you that. So that's what you find in the lectures. And I find that very exciting. And we have Joe, George, their generosity, Randy and Andrew in their vision for what will happen to the center, all to thank for that. And it's been a dream job to be part of it. That explains my insanity of working for free.